Hello guys and welcome back for part 5. Sorry to leave you hanging like that, but it's more content and the other video would have went on for too long, so we'll get straight back into it. You'll see exactly what's wrong with the engine and where we're going to go with it. So I hope you enjoy. So guys, this is where I left you in the last video. If you remember, I took the oil sump off and my face dropped. Yeah, that's not good. So let's get back into it and I'll show you exactly what's wrong with the GTOs engine. So first of all, that oil strainer is disgusting. I suppose it's done its job, but that doesn't look good. That to me looks like bearing material, as in the big end bearings, maybe even the crank main bearings, you name it. That shouldn't be there. That's not good. That means there's something very wrong with the engine, as does all of that. That's not what we wanted to see. The only thing I could check in regards to that would be if there's any play in the big ends. These. So these go to the rods which have the pistons on top. Sorry, these are the rods which have the pistons on top. This is your crank which runs through the middle with your counterweight. This is the brace. This like tightens the crank down to the block. But that's not good. So let's just get into it and see why or what's caused that. So that's nice and stiff. Already on. The second one in. That's not good. That's very bad. The engine's very bad. There should be no play in that whatsoever, and that's quite a lot of movement. Meaning the bearings failed. So that one's defo done. This one down here, no movement. No movement. That's tight. Again, no movement. So all of this material in the strainer, all of that must be off this. And hopefully it's nothing to do with the main bearings on the actual crank. But we're only going to see that when we take this off. Let me see what condition the houses are in and how the bearing looks, but that's really not good. Welcome to the world of cars, people. First things first, let's get the oil strainer off. Give us some space. We'll get the crank brace off, and then from there we'll have to take all the rod caps off. And then we can see the condition of the bearings on this piston, see how bad it is, see if it's affected the crank. And we'll just have to go from there because there's not much else I can do at this current time. And yeah, we'll just have to work through it and see how far we get. Oh well, at least the strainer's done its job. It's caught all the bits. Probably stopped it from being a lot worse, to be quite honest. So I can only really thank it for that. It's just a shame it's had to do that as a result of bearing wear on this piston. So we'll get the brace off with these 8 bolts. So this, while I'm here, with this being an early generation GTO, meaning a Mark 1, these are what are known as the 2-bolt block. So that's because the crank brace is held in with 2 bolts. Whereas the older generations, Mark 3 upwards, are called 4 bolts, and I'll let you guess why. But there's 2 on either side, so there's 4 bolts per brace for each bearing. They're the more desired blocks purely because with them being 4 bolts, as you can imagine, we can take a bit more stress, so you can get a bit more power out of them, and you can abuse them a little bit more should you choose to. But these 2 bolts, for me, for my application, are more than enough for now. And should I choose to go up in the horsepower to stupid numbers, I'll have to change the whole engine anyway, or at the very least the block. So to do that, the engine will have to come out. So again, like I said earlier on, with the MLS head gasket, if I want to do big upgrades to get big power to this engine, it will have to come back out the car. This is another reason why, because it's a 2-bolt, not a 4. But like I said, it's enough for me. So like I did on the heads, I'm going to get a bit of cardboard. I'm going to make a note of where these go based on the arrow. There's a cast in arrow on this showing the front of the engine. And I'll put the bolts in the holes so I know exactly where I got them from and so I know where to put them back should I not change them. So we'll try and get this off and then we'll address the rods, get the rod caps off, and then we'll try and get the crank out to see if this particular part of the crank has any heat marks, any excessive wear. That will indicate we would either need a new crank or we would need to get the crank ground and put an oversized bearing in to make up for the material that's been taken off. So after a bit of gentle persuasion with a really big hammer, managed to get that brace free. So we'll flip it over, we'll look for wear. Hopefully there's no score marks or any scorch marks, as in this being getting too hot. If there is, it's not a good sign, but I think there might be, purely down to the fact that with that big end on cylinder 1, I think it was knocking, it's going to put excess vibrations on the crank, it's going to put excess wear on the other bearings, and it's just going to slowly make its way down, and I think that might have been the case, but we'll get that big brace off and we'll see what the score is. Right then guys, the moment of truth. Let's see what the crack is and if it's done. Oh no. Right, so that main bearing stayed on there, so we need to pull that out, but that one is showing signs of wear. See the big score mark down the middle, and that's a different colour to the ends. I hardly doubt it's down to the material. I think it's been getting hot. That one's still on there, so I'll pull that off now. And then the two end ones don't look too bad, but that's quite worrying. I'm no machinist, I'm no specialist. I haven't really got a full clue of what I'm looking at, but I know for a fact that that shouldn't be scored the way it is, because that doesn't look great. So we'll pull that one out as well, right there, because that's the wrong side. So we'll take that off, I'll show you that separately, and we'll see what the condition is with that. This is the one that was still on there. Same again. They're quite deep scores. You can see on the left hand side of the bearing. That is not great. It's quite worrying, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's kind of what I get for buying a project car, but yeah, there's a few scores on the crank. I'll get it out in better light so you can see it, but it looks like I might need to send the crank off to get reground and then buy bigger bearings to compensate, or I might just buy a brand new crank, which could lead to the forge route, but I don't know if I'm going to do that because that's very expensive. And like I said before, this is a 2-bolt, so there's only so far I can go with it before I end up making this a whole lot worse with more expensive parts, which in turn will cost me a lot more money in the future. But stay tuned, you never know. I'm an idiot, I might do it, why not? But yeah, all down to that rust bucket right there. So as I've just showed you, there is wear on the main bearings. I'm not surprised. I'm gutted to say the least, but I'm not surprised. Although this engine's only on 95,000 kilometers, which is roughly 60,000 miles, which actually isn't that much. So it only really goes to show how well the engine's been looked after previously, i.e. not at all. So we'll get down to it. We'll get the big end caps off, all the pistons, all the rods, and no doubt those bearings will be done in as well. I know for a fact cylinder 1 is, but we'll work our way through and hopefully it's only cylinder 1. So yeah, let's get to it. Well, the bottom end of this engine is just the gift that keeps on giving, because I've just went to remove the rear main seal and I looked at the housing and it looks like this. Boom. Nice big crack right down the middle. And the worst part is, I think I've just done that, because it splits from the case there So managed to get the bolt out the back, even though it's quite tight. Got it from the case, and I heard the crack. And then I looked at the top, and there she is. A nice, juicy crack right down the middle of the housing. So now I'm going to have to struggle around on the internet to try and find a replacement. And I can almost guarantee it's not going to be an easy job. Nor can I fix that, because that is the rear main seal. And if that leaks, it covers your clutch and oil. You've got no clutch, and you've got to take the gearbox off just to get to it. And I am not doing that when it's in the engine, in the car. So even though the rear main seal housing's cracked, I did get it off eventually. So now we'll get the oil pump off the front, and then we can lift the crank out. And that is the last thing to come out of the engine. And we're literally down to the block, which is the main goal. So I'll get the crank out, I'll get it on the bench, and I'll go over the crank and the wobbly piston to show you why it's such a big issue, and try and brainstorm ideas of what I'm going to do to fix it, because that can't go back in the way it is. And I don't think you can just throw a bearing in and expect it to work, because it's added excess wear to the crank and the big end on the rod. So let's get the crank out and go from there. So looking at the oil pump, I think there's only 5 bolts. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Get them out, slide it over the snout of the crank, move that to one side, and then it should be able to lift the crank out from the top, because this is the only thing stopping it now. And then we'll get the crank on the table and go over it. Now I think to get this off, I might actually need to get the timing sprocket off the crank. Don't even know if that's what it's called, but it looks like I might need to get that off, because that is bigger than the hole on the oil pump, which means that is in the way, and I'm probably gonna need to pull that off. So now I'm gonna have to figure out how to do that and get back to you. So after a bit of research, if you just get a screwdriver behind this and twist it gently, this just slides off, which is handy, because there's no way you would have got a hub puller behind that, because the gap between the oil pump and the end of this was way too small. So at least one thing's easy on the bottom end of this engine. But because it's keyed, I'll show you what that means. So because it's keyed, you see the notch in the top, don't know if it'll focus, but on there you can see there's a little metal bar. That will need to come out to allow the oil seal on the pump to clear the snout of the crank, because it'll hit the key otherwise and then it won't come out. So I'll get that off now, and then we'll slide the pump forward, and then after that the crank can get lifted out, and we're left with the end goal of just the block. So let's get that out. There we go. So this is what's known as a woodruff key. So it's like a crescent moon shape, and similarly it slots into an internal crescent moon on the crank. I think it's to allow movement for it to self-position once it goes in. But that's out, so this oil pump, when we give it a few taps, should slide forward. We can take that off and we can carry on. And just like that, there's your oil pump in there. And there's the seal I was on about. So if we left the key in that, you wouldn't have got that past the seal. So that's off. Now the crank, if you give it a knock, will come up. So on the crank assembly, on these two mainly, you've got something called thrust washers. Now these thrust washers are designed to stop the crank walking forwards and back. So as you can see, there's a leg on them. So when you go in, you've got to make sure you put them in the right way and in the right slot on the block itself, because they're specifically designed to go in a certain way. Because on this, you can't see from there, I'll show you in a bit, but on this there's a cutout on the back and a bevel on the front. So they go in a specific way, and if you get that wrong, you could probably cause engine damage on the crank or excessive wear as a result. So you need to make sure you put them in properly when you're doing it. And that's the same for all engines. They will all have thrust washers. So we'll get them off the top, lift the crank out and take the ones from underneath with the plain bearings underneath, and we'll move it to the bench. So we should be able to lift the crank out. There we go, bit of gentle persuasion, and there it is. That is the crankshaft for the Mitsubishi Gto V6. See, one of the bearings are stuck in the middle there. So I'll take that out, and I'll take all the other bearings out the block, and then that's it. And now we're down to just the block. Obviously the bearings are still in the housings, but for now we'll leave them as they are, because this is going to get cleaned up. The gaskets need to come off, all the rust needs to go, a lot needs to be done to it, but this is what's left. Oil pans on the floor, and that bench is the engine, completely disassembled, minus the heads. That's a separate thing because there's already a lot going on and I don't seem to have the space. So there it is. Now I'll walk you through the piston along with the crank, the wear and why it's such a bad thing. So here's the crank. I've got my torch on, so apologies if the quality is not great. I will try and get as good a view of it as I can. But this here is where the rattly piston was sitting. So that, as you can see, there's quite a fair bit in terms of score marks all the way around on the crank, which isn't good. That should be smooth, like this one for example, nice and smooth, no scratches, no scores, nothing. But because the bearing had spun on this, it created excess wear, it wasn't getting lubricated as it should, and in turn it's made an excess of scoring all around it. Backside's the same, and that is because of this piston right here. I don't even need to wipe the oil away for you to see. That is disgusting. All those individual lines on the inside should not be there. That is just wrong. On all the other pistons, show you on this one, there's a notch right in the corner. That's to seat the bearing so you know it's sitting in the right place, and so you know it's gone in the right orientation. Whereas on this, because the bearing spun round at such high RPM as the crank's rotating, that lip is gone. The lip should be there, it's smooth. All this, just, it's rough. There's a big lip on the side where it's walked forward and back. It's not good. And because it's created excess wear, engines run on very, very minute tolerances. And that would have opened the tolerances up on the piston and the crank, which means the crank now may need to be reground to take a little bit more off, to then compensate by putting bigger bearings into this to fill a gap and then secure the piston so it doesn't wobble and you don't get any rotation on the bearing where it shouldn't move. But luckily for me, I don't know if it's luckily or not, but at least it's only one and not all six, and it's only on one part of the crank as opposed to all of it. The rest of the crank actually looks quite good. I'm impressed with the fact that the rest of it, it's a bit gritty, but that's just because of me gloves and dirt that'll get cleaned up and stuff before it goes back in. But the rest of it looks okay. It's just that one and that piston. So while it's out, we'll fix it, do it all properly, and then when we get it back in, it should be running nice and smooth. As you can see by the bench, one, I don't have much space, but two, we've got a lot done today. And other than the heads, which I'll do a separate video on, that ties up the engine teardown quite nicely. So guys, that's the engine torn down. Hopefully all the nasty surprises are over, minus the heads, but we'll forget about that for now. If you've enjoyed the teardown, leave a like, smash that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you can see it all go back together, and leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if there's anything you want me to do, anything you want me to change, whether you liked it or not. I'll read the comments. Just let me know. It's good to know and get some feedback from people who actually watch the videos. And Hopefully it goes back together a lot better than it came apart, and we don't have any issues, and it's clean, it's nice, it's shiny, and it works. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Afraid to turn